The ocean roared with unexpected ferocity as Karina Foster waded into what should have been a calm afternoon swim, unaware that the deceptive currents beneath the surface were about to change her life forever. What began as a refreshing escape from her writer's block quickly transformed into a nightmare as the rip current gripped her body, pulling her farther from shore with each passing second. Yards away, Yates Sutherland stood on the private section of beach, his mind still tangled in the acquisition deal he'd just closed over the phone. The Sutherland Group's CEO had promised his executive team he'd take a real vacation this time. No laptops, minimal phone calls, but old habits died hard. At 35, he'd built his technology company into a billion-dollar enterprise, but relaxation remained a foreign concept. A distant splash caught his attention, then a shout. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a woman struggling against the water, her arms flailing in unmistakable distress. Without hesitation, Yates dropped his phone onto his towel and sprinted toward the shoreline. "Help!" Karina screamed, her voice barely audible above the crash of waves. The more she fought, the stronger the current seemed to pull. Her lungs burned as salt water splashed into her mouth. 28 years old, and this was how it would end a foolish swim at an unfamiliar beach. Yates dove into the water, his powerful strokes cutting through the waves with practiced precision. Years of competitive swimming in college served him well as he navigated toward the struggling woman. The rip current caught him too, but he knew better than to fight it directly. "Stop struggling!" he shouted when he got within earshot. "I'm coming to you!" Karina's panic subsided slightly at the sound of his voice, but the current continued dragging her farther out. Her strength was fading fast. When Yates reached her, he wrapped a strong arm around her waist. "I've got you," he said firmly. "Don't fight me. We're going to swim parallel to the shore first, then back in." Karina nodded weakly, clinging to him as he guided them sideways out of the current's strongest pull. His body was warm against hers, solid and reassuring in the cold, churning water. "Deep breaths," he instructed, his voice calm despite the exertion evident in his face. "You're going to be okay." The journey back to shore seemed endless, but Yates never faltered. His muscles strained against the persistent pull of the water. One arm keeping Karina secure while the other propelled them forward. When they finally reached shallow water, they both collapsed onto the sand, gasping for breath. "Thank you," Karina managed between coughs, seawater spilling from her lungs. "I thought I was going to die out there." Yates pushed himself to a sitting position, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Rip currents are no joke. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, finally getting a good look at her rescuer. He was tall, with shoulders broadened by what must have been years of swimming and eyes the color of sea glass. "I'm Karina," she said, extending a trembling hand. "Yates," he replied, taking her hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Yates Sutherland. You should probably get checked out by a doctor." "I'm fine, really," Karina insisted, though her body still shook from the ordeal. "Just embarrassed. I should have known better than to swim alone." A woman in a resort uniform rushed over, followed by a lifeguard who had clearly arrived too late. "Sir, miss, are you all right? We saw what happened from the observation deck." Yates stood, helping Karina to her feet. "We're okay, but she should probably see a doctor as a precaution." "I don't need," Karina began, but a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, and she swayed on her feet. Yates caught her arm, steadying her. "That settles it. You're seeing a doctor." The resort staff helped them to the medical office on the property, where a physician examined Karina while Yates waited outside. He paced the small waiting area, surprising himself with his concern for this stranger. When the doctor emerged, Yates stopped mid-stride. "She's going to be fine," the doctor assured him. "No water in the lungs, just exhaustion and mild shock. I recommend rest for the remainder of the day." Relief flooded through Yates. "Thank you, doctor." When Karina emerged, wrapped in a resort robe, she looked much better. Color had returned to her cheeks, though her eyes still held the lingering fear of her near drowning. "The hero awaits," she said with a small smile. "I really can't thank you enough." Yates waved off her thanks. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone could have, Karina corrected. The lifeguard told me how dangerous that current was. You saved my life, Mr. Sutherland. Yates, please. He hesitated, then asked, Are you staying at the resort? I'd be happy to walk you back to your room. Karina nodded. Bungalow 17. It's not far. They walked slowly along the resort's winding paths, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured grounds. Karina hugged the robe tighter around her body, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. So what brings you to Fiji? Yates asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Work, sort of. I'm a writer, novels, mostly. I came here hoping for inspiration. She laughed softly. Nearly drowning wasn't the kind of inspiration I was looking for. Yates smiled, and the transformation in his face was remarkable. The serious, intense rescuer, replaced by a man with a warm, genuine smile that created small crinkles at the corners of his eyes. What do you write? Historical fiction. My last book was set during the gold rush. I'm trying to branch out, maybe something with a tropical setting. She glanced sideways at him. What about you? Business or pleasure? Business that I'm attempting to turn into pleasure, he admitted. My executive team practically forced me to take a vacation. They reached her bungalow, a charming structure perched on stilts over a shallow lagoon. Karina turned to face him. Would you like to come in for coffee? Or something stronger? I feel like I owe you at least a drink for saving my life. Yates hesitated, aware of the pull he felt toward this woman, something beyond the obvious attraction to her delicate features and warm brown eyes. There was something about her that intrigued him, a sense of quiet resilience beneath the vulnerability. I'd like that, he said finally. But why don't we make it dinner instead? Give you time to rest and recover. The resort has an excellent restaurant on the North Beach. Karina's smile widened. That sounds perfect. 8 o'clock? I'll meet you here, Yates confirmed, reluctant to leave but aware that she needed time to recover from her ordeal. As he walked back to his own bungalow, Yates found himself thinking about Karina's eyes, the way they had lit up when she talked about her writing. It had been a long time since he'd felt this immediate connection with someone. His life had become a relentless cycle of board meetings, acquisitions, and product launches, leaving little time for meaningful relationships. Meanwhile, Karina sank onto her bed, still processing the day's events. Nearly drowning had been terrifying, but being rescued by Yates Sutherland had been something else entirely. There was an intensity about him that went beyond his obvious good looks. She reached for her laptop, suddenly inspired to write for the first time in weeks. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she began to type. The ocean does not forgive mistakes, but sometimes it delivers second chances. At precisely 8 o'clock, Yates knocked on Karina's door. He'd traded his swim trunks for linen pants and a crisp white shirt, casual yet refined. When Karina opened the door, he momentarily lost his train of thought. She wore a simple sundress in a deep blue that complemented her olive skin, her dark hair falling in natural waves around her shoulders. You look lovely, he said, meaning it. Karina felt her cheeks warm. Thank you. I clean up okay when I'm not half drowned. The restaurant was situated on a deck extending over the water, illuminated by tiki torches and string lights that created a magical atmosphere against the night sky. They were seated at a corner table with an unobstructed view of the moonlit ocean. Beautiful but treacherous, Karina murmured, looking out at the water. Like many beautiful things, Yates agreed, studying her profile in the flickering light. Their conversation flowed easily over dinner, moving from Karina's writing career to Yates's company. He spoke with passion about the innovative medical technology his firm was developing, and Karina found herself captivated by his vision. So you're not just any CEO, she said, taking a sip of her wine. You're changing lives with your work. Yates looked momentarily surprised, as if not used to having his work framed in such human terms. I suppose that's the goal. Technology that makes healthcare more accessible, more effective. He paused. What about your work? Do your stories change lives? Karina considered this. In smaller ways, perhaps. I try to illuminate forgotten corners of history, bring voices to people who didn't have them in their time. That's beautiful, Yates said softly. Important work. As they shared dessert, a decadent chocolate creation that melted on their tongues, Karina found herself wondering what it would be like to know this man beyond this tropical interlude, to see him in his element, commanding a boardroom, bringing his visionary ideas to life. "How long are you staying in Fiji?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Another week," Yates replied. "You?" "The same." Karina smiled, a flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Any plans for tomorrow?" Yates leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I was thinking of exploring the island a bit. There's supposed to be a waterfall about an hour's hike from here. Care to join me? I promise to keep you safe from any rogue currents." Karina laughed. "I'd like that. Though maybe we should stay on dry land for a while." After dinner, Yates walked her back to her bungalow, the night air warm and heavy with the scent of tropical flowers. At her door, they paused, neither quite ready for the evening to end. "Thank you for dinner," Karina said, "and for the rescue. It's been a rather extraordinary day." "It has," Yates agreed. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's hike isn't easy." Karina nodded, her skin tingling where his fingers had brushed against it. "Good night, Yates." "Good night, Karina." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows of the resort path. Only when she closed the door did she realize she'd been holding her breath. The morning dawned clear and bright, the perfect day for their hike. Karina dressed in lightweight hiking clothes and practical shoes, preparing a small backpack with water and snacks. When Yates arrived, he carried a similar pack, plus a first aid kit. "Ready for an adventure that hopefully won't require resuscitation?" he asked with a smile. "Lead the way, Mr. Rescue," she replied, falling into step beside him. The trail took them through dense tropical forest, the canopy overhead providing welcome shade as the day grew warmer. Yates moved with surprising agility for a corporate executive, occasionally offering Karina his hand over particularly rough terrain. "So tell me," she said as they paused to drink water beside a small stream, "how does a CEO of a major tech company become such an accomplished swimmer?" Yates sat on a boulder, stretching his long legs. "I swam competitively through college. It was my ticket to Stanford, actually. Full scholarship." "Impressive." Karina studied him with newfound appreciation. "My parents couldn't afford college otherwise," he continued, surprising himself with the admission. He rarely spoke about his background. "Dad was a factory worker, Mom a nurse's aide. They worked themselves to the bone to give me opportunities." Karina sat beside him. "And look what you've done with those opportunities. They must be incredibly proud." "They would have been," Yates said quietly. "They died in a car accident my sophomore year." Karina's hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'm so sorry." Yates looked down at their joined hands, a simple human connection that somehow felt profound. "It was a long time ago, but it shaped everything that came after. I finished school, started the company, threw myself into work." He looked up at her. "What about your family?" "Much less dramatic," Karina said. "Parents still happily married in Boston. Dad's a history professor, which probably explains my obsession with the past. Mom runs a small bookshop. I have a younger brother in medical school." "They sound wonderful," Yates said genuinely. "They are. Supportive, but not pushy. When I said I wanted to be a writer instead of following Dad into academia, they just asked how they could help." They continued their hike, the trail growing steeper as they neared the waterfall. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, favorite books, travel experiences, the best coffee shops in their respective home cities of San Francisco, Yates, and Boston, Karina. When they finally reached the waterfall, the sight took Karina's breath away. Water cascaded down a sheer rock face into a crystal-clear pool surrounded by lush vegetation and colorful wildflowers. "It's like something from a movie," she whispered. Yates watched her face, finding her wonder more captivating than the scenery. Worth the hike? Absolutely. Karina turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement. Are we swimming? Yates raised an eyebrow. After yesterday, you're eager to get back in the water? With you around, I feel safe, she admitted, then blushed at the implication of her words. They changed into swimwear behind separate rock formations, Karina into the one-piece swimsuit she'd worn beneath her hiking clothes, Yates into the swim trunks he'd packed. The water was cool and refreshing after the humid hike, and Karina laughed with pure joy as she swam toward the base of the waterfall. Yates followed, captivated by her uninhibited delight. When she disappeared behind the curtain of water, he pursued, finding her in a small cave-like space behind the falls. Look at this place, she called over the roar of the water. It's magical. They stood close in the confined space, water droplets catching the filtered light on Karina's skin. Yates couldn't help himself. He reached out, tracing a droplet's path down her cheek with his thumb. Magical, he agreed, though he wasn't looking at their surroundings. Karina's breath caught in her throat as his gaze dropped to her lips. The moments stretched between them, charged with possibility. When Yates leaned down, she met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with shared hunger. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her against him, and Karina melted into his embrace, her hands finding their way to the nape of his neck. The roar of the waterfall seemed to fade as they lost themselves in the kiss, in the sensation of wet skin against wet skin. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Yates rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you on the beach, he admitted. Even when I was coughing up seawater, Karina teased, though her voice was husky with desire. Especially then, he said with a smile. You looked so fierce, so determined to live. They spent hours at the waterfall, alternating between swimming in the crystal pool and stretching out on sun-warmed rocks to dry. Karina found herself studying Yates when he wasn't looking, the lean muscles of his torso, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. This man was nothing like the corporate sharks she'd dated in the past. Despite his success, there was an authenticity to Yates that drew her in. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly gathered their things for the hike back. The return journey was companionable, their hands often finding each other over rough terrain, lingering even when the path smoothed out. Would you like to have dinner at my bungalow tonight? Yates asked as they approached the resort. I can arrange for the chef to prepare something special. Karina nodded, pleased by the privacy his suggestion offered. I'd like that very much. They parted with another kiss, this one gentle but full of promise, before heading to their respective bungalows to shower and change. Yates's bungalow was larger than Karina's, with a spacious deck overlooking the ocean. When she arrived, she found the deck transformed a table set with fine china and crystal, candles flickering in hurricane lamps, and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. This is beautiful, she said, accepting the glass of champagne Yates offered. The perks of being a CEO, he said with a self-deprecating smile, though I rarely use them for anything this enjoyable. Over a dinner of fresh seafood and tropical fruits, they delved deeper into each other's lives. Karina spoke of her struggles as a writer, the rejection letters, the breakthrough that came with her third novel, the pressure to follow up her first success. Yates shared the challenges of building his company from a dorm room project to an international corporation, the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees. It's lonely sometimes, he admitted, surprising himself again with his candor. At the top, I mean. Everyone wants something. Everyone has expectations. Karina reached across the table, taking his hand. Is that why you haven't taken a vacation in 3 years? Yates looked startled. How did you know that? She smiled. Your shoulders finally relaxed today, around hour 2 of our hike, like your body was remembering what it feels like to not carry the weight of an empire. He stared at her, momentarily speechless. You see too much, he said finally, but his tone was warm, appreciative. It's the writer in me, Karina replied. I'm always observing, collecting details. Am I going to end up in your next book? Yates asked, refilling their champagne glasses. Karina's eyes twinkled. Maybe? The dashing CEO who rescues drowning maidens in his spare time? It has potential. As the evening progressed, they moved to a comfortable seating area on the deck, the champagne giving way to snifters of aged rum. Karina curled against Yates's side as they watched the moon create a silver path across the dark water. "I never expected this," she said softly, her head resting on his shoulder. "When I came to Fiji, I was just looking for a setting for my next book. Instead, I found—" "What did you find?" Yates asked when she trailed off, his arm tightening around her. Karina looked up at him, vulnerability and desire mingling in her gaze. "You," she whispered. "I found you." This time, when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no holding back. Yates pulled her onto his lap, his hands tangling in her hair as he deepened the kiss. Karina responded with equal fervor, her body molding against his, her hands exploring the broad expanse of his shoulders. When Yates lifted her, carrying her from the deck into the bungalow, Karina wrapped her arms around his neck, her lips never leaving his. They fell onto his bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered desires, exploring each other with increasing urgency. Later, as they lay entwined in the rumpled sheets, Karina traced lazy patterns on Yates's chest, marveling at the turn her life had taken in just 2 days. "You know," she murmured, "if someone had told me yesterday morning that nearly drowning would lead to this, I might have walked into that rip current on purpose." Yates laughed, the sound reverberating through his chest beneath her ear. "Please don't make a habit of it. My heart can only take so much." She propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face in the moonlight filtering through the windows. "Is that what this is? A vacation fling? Because I should warn you, I'm developing inconvenient feelings." Yates reached up, cradling her face in his palm. "Karina, nothing about how I feel for you is casual or temporary." His expression grew serious. "But my life is in San Francisco, the company, everything I've built. And mine is in Boston," she acknowledged. "My family, my writing community." They fell silent, the reality of their situation settling between them like an unwelcome guest. "We have a week," Yates said finally. "Let's make the most of it, and then we'll figure something out. I'm not ready to let you go." Karina nodded, lowering her head to kiss him again, pushing thoughts of the future away. For now they had this connection that had sprung up so unexpectedly between them, this desire that went beyond the physical. The next 5 days passed in a blissful haze. They explored the island together, snorkeling in secluded coves, hiking to ancient ruins, sampling local cuisine in tiny villages far from the resort's manicured perfection. In the evenings, they alternated between their bungalows, unable to bear being apart once the sun set. On their 4th night together, as they lay watching stars from Karina's deck, Yates received a call from his office. He apologized before taking it, stepping inside to speak privately. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "Everything okay?" Karina asked, sitting up from her lounger. "A complication with the new cardiac device we're developing," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "The FDA has questions about our latest test results." "Anything serious?" Yates shook his head. "Just bureaucratic red tape, but it could delay approval by months if we don't address it quickly." He looked at her apologetically. "I need to make some more calls, review some data." "Of course," Karina said, understanding. "Do what you need to do." Yates worked late into the night, hunched over his laptop while Karina dozed nearby. She woke once to find him still working, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow, the weight of his responsibilities evident in the set of his shoulders. In the morning, he apologized again for the interruption. "This isn't how I wanted to spend our time together." Karina silenced him with a kiss. "You're saving lives, Yates. I understand." And she did better than she had expected to. His dedication was part of what made him who he was, part of what had drawn her to him. Their 5th day, Yates arranged a private boat tour around the island, complete with a picnic lunch on a deserted beach accessible only by sea. As they sat on a blanket under swaying palms, feeding each other tropical fruits and stealing kisses that tasted of mango and salt, Karina felt a growing certainty that what they had found was rare and precious. "Tell me about your home in San Francisco," she said, lying back on the blanket, using his lap as a pillow. Yates stroked her hair absently. "It's a penthouse in Pacific Heights. Amazing views of the bay, but I'm rarely there enough to enjoy them. Too much glass and chrome, according to my sister. Not enough personality." "You have a sister?" Karina realized there was still so much she didn't know about him. "Younger sister Yvonne. She's a pediatrician in Seattle, married with twin boys." His expression softened. "The only family I have left. She's always telling me I work too hard. Need to find balance." His fingers traced the curve of Karina's cheek. "She'd like you." "I'd like to meet her someday," Karina said, the implication of a future hanging between them. "What about your place in Boston?" Karina smiled. "A small brownstone apartment in Back Bay, bookshelves everywhere, hardwood floors, a tiny balcony where I grow herbs in the summer. It's cozy, lived in." "Like you," Yates said softly. She looked up at him, puzzled. "Like me?" Warm, inviting, full of stories. He leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'd like to see it someday." The weight of their impending separation hung over them as they returned to the resort that evening. They had only 2 days left before Yates would fly back to San Francisco and Karina to Boston, nearly 3,000 miles between them. That night, their lovemaking had a desperate edge, as if they could somehow store up enough memories to last through the separation ahead. Afterward, Karina lay awake, watching Yates sleep, memorizing the contours of his face in the dim light. She had come to Fiji looking for inspiration and found something far more profound. But was it enough? Could something that had bloomed so quickly in this tropical paradise survive in the real world with its demands and distances? The next morning, Yates woke her with coffee and a proposition. "Let's spend our last full day on a neighboring island. There's a small village known for their traditional crafts, and the beaches are supposed to be incredible." Karina agreed eagerly, pushing aside thoughts of their imminent parting. They took a small ferry to the island, where they wandered through the village market, purchasing souvenirs for family and admiring the intricate wood carvings and woven textiles created by local artisans. At a small cafe overlooking the harbor, they lingered over lunch, neither wanting the day to end. Yates reached across the table, taking Karina's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he began, his expression serious. "About us, about what happens after tomorrow." Karina's heart quickened. "And?" "I want to try to make this work," he said firmly. "It won't be easy. Our lives are on opposite coasts. We both have demanding careers, but what we have, I don't want to lose it." Relief flooded through Karina. "I want that too," she admitted. "So much. But how? Long-distance relationships are hard enough when it's a few hours' drive, let alone a 6-hour flight." "We make time," Yates said simply. "I can fly to Boston for weekends. You can come to San Francisco. We have video calls, texts, emails." He squeezed her hand. "It's not ideal, but it's a start. And maybe, eventually, one of us might consider relocating." The prospect both thrilled and terrified Karina. Could she leave Boston, her support network, her writing community? Could he leave the headquarters of his company? These were questions without easy answers, but the fact that Yates was willing to consider them at all spoke volumes. "Let's try," she agreed, bringing his hand to her lips. Their final night in Fiji, they attended a traditional Fijian feast at the resort Alovo, where food was cooked in earth ovens, followed by fire dancers and music. Under the stars, surrounded by the rhythmic beating of drums, Yates pulled Karina close for a dance. "I have something for you," he murmured in her ear, guiding her away from the celebration to a quiet spot near the water's edge. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Karina's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a pendant, a delicate silver representation of a wave, inlaid with a single blue stone that caught the moonlight. "To remind you of where we began," Yates said, removing the necklace from its box. "May I?" Karina turned, lifting her hair as he fastened the pendant around her neck. When she turned back to face him, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the pendant where it rested against her skin. "You're beautiful," Yates said, drawing her into his arms, "and remarkable and talented, and I am so grateful that Rip Current brought you into my life." Karina laughed through her tears. "That's a rather positive spin on a near-death experience." He kissed her then, beneath the Fijian stars, a kiss full of promise and possibility. When they returned to his bungalow later, they made love with a sweet intensity that spoke of beginnings rather than endings. Morning came too quickly. They shared a quiet breakfast on Yates's deck, speaking little, each lost in thought about the separation to come. Karina's flight was scheduled to depart first, just after noon. Yates insisted on accompanying her to the airport, holding her hand throughout the journey as if afraid to let go. At the security checkpoint, they faced each other, the reality of their parting finally unavoidable. "This isn't goodbye," Yates said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "It's just until next time. I'll be in Boston in 2 weeks, I promise." Karina nodded, trying to be brave. 2 weeks. I'll show you my tiny balcony garden." "I can't wait." He kissed her deeply, uncaring of the curious glances from other travelers. "Safe travels, Karina Foster. I'll call you when you land." "I'll answer," she promised, reluctantly stepping away. At the security gate, she turned for one last look, finding him still watching her, his tall figure standing out among the crowd. The flight home was interminable. Karina alternated between reliving every moment of their week together and worrying about the future. Would the connection they'd formed withstand the pressures of distance and time? Would Yates's feelings cool once he was back in his world of board meetings and business deals? When she finally landed in Boston, her phone chimed with a text message, "Missing you already. Call when you're home safe." Relief washed over her. That night they talked for hours on video chat, Yates in his San Francisco penthouse all glass and chrome, just as he'd described, and Karina in her book-filled apartment. Seeing him in his element, surrounded by the trappings of his success, made their different worlds seem even more apparent, but the way his eyes lit up when he saw her face on the screen reassured her that what they had transcended those differences. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of text messages, nightly phone calls, and shared photos of their daily lives. Karina threw herself back into her writing, finding that her experience in Fiji and with Yates had broken through her creative block. Words flowed easily as she began a new novel, one set against the backdrop of a tropical island where two strangers from different worlds found unexpected connection. Yates, meanwhile, tackled the FDA issues head-on, working tirelessly to address the concerns while maintaining his nightly calls with Karina. He found himself sharing more of his work challenges with her, valuing her perspective and the way she could make him laugh even on his most stressful days. When the day of his visit finally arrived, Karina waited anxiously at Logan Airport, scanning the crowd of arriving passengers. When she spotted him tall, distinguished in a casual blazer and jeans, her heart leapt. He saw her at the same moment, his face breaking into a broad smile as he quickened his pace. They met in the middle of the terminal, Yates dropping his carry-on bag to sweep Karina into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her. "Hi," he said when he finally set her down, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. "Hi yourself," she replied, breathless and giddy. "Welcome to Boston." The weekend was perfect. Karina showed Yates her favorite parts of the city, from the hidden gems of the North End to the quiet corners of the public garden. They dined at a hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant where the owner greeted Karina by name, spent a rainy afternoon exploring the Museum of Fine Arts, and walked along the Charles River as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In Karina's apartment, Yates examined her bookshelves, pulling out dog-eared copies of her favorite novels and first editions of her own published works. "I read your books, you know," he said, holding up her latest novel. "After I got back to San Francisco. You're incredibly talented." Karina blushed, pleased and surprised. "What did you think?" "I think," he said, setting the book down and pulling her into his arms, "that I'm falling in love with an extraordinary woman whose mind is as beautiful as she is." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and real. Karina's heart raced as she met his gaze. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. Their weekend together strengthened the bond between them, proving that what they had found in Fiji wasn't just a vacation romance, but something deeper, more enduring. When Sunday evening came and Yates had to return to San Francisco, the parting was easier than before. Tempered by the knowledge that they would see each other again in 3 weeks, when Karina would fly to California. The pattern continued over the next few months, alternating visits to each other's cities, daily calls and texts, building a relationship across the distance that separated them. They met each other's friends, explored each other's worlds, finding common ground and embracing their differences. In Boston, Yates attended a book reading where Karina shared excerpts from her work in progress, watching with pride as she captivated the audience. In San Francisco, Karina accompanied Yates to a charity gala, charming his colleagues and holding her own in conversations about the future of medical technology. It wasn't always easy. There were missed calls due to time zone confusion, frustrating delays at airports, the ache of physical separation that video chats couldn't fully bridge. But they persevered, each believing that what they were building was worth the challenges. 4 months after their first meeting in Fiji, during one of Karina's visits to San Francisco, Yates took her to dinner at a small, exclusive restaurant overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. As they lingered over dessert, watching the bridge's lights illuminate against the darkening sky, he reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his expression serious but warm, "about us, about the future." Karina's pulse quickened. "Oh, this back and forth, these stolen weekends, they're wonderful. But not enough." He took a deep breath. "Sutherland Group is opening an East Coast headquarters in Boston next year. We've been planning it for months, but now I have an additional incentive to make it happen sooner." Karina stared at him, processing his words. "You're moving to Boston?" Yates nodded. "Not permanently. I'll still need to be in San Francisco regularly, but I could base myself primarily in Boston, be there most of the time." His eyes searched hers. "If that's something you'd want." "If that's something I'd want?" Karina repeated, incredulous. "Yates, that would be incredible." She squeezed his hand. "But are you sure? Your life is here, your company." "My company will be fine," he interrupted gently. "And my life, Karina, my life is with you now. These past months have shown me that. When I'm with you, everything else makes more sense. You ground me, challenge me, make me happier than I've been since—" He paused. "Since before I lost my parents. Maybe ever." Tears welled in Karina's eyes. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Yates replied, raising her hand to his lips, "enough to brave Boston winters." They laughed together, the joy of their decision filling the space between them. 2 weeks later, they returned to Fiji, a surprise Yates had arranged to celebrate their decision to build a life together. They stayed in the same resort, even requesting the same bungalows, though they used only one. On their second evening, they walked along the beach where they had first met, the sight of Karina's near drowning now transformed in their memories to the beginning of something beautiful. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, Yates stopped walking, turning to face Karina. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you struggling in that rip current?" he asked. Karina shook her head. "I thought, please let me reach her in time." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I didn't know then that in saving you, I was saving myself too from a life half-lived, focused on work to the exclusion of everything else." He dropped to one knee on the sand, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Karina gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, the center stone surrounded by smaller sapphires the color of the Fijian sea. "Karina Foster, You swept into my life like that rip current, unexpected and powerful, changing my course forever. Yates's eyes shone with emotion. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, writing our story together, building a home, a family, a future. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Karina's face as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, Yates Sutherland, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting them in the golden light of new beginnings. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony on that same Fijian beach, with only their closest family and friends in attendance. Yates's sister Yvonne stood as his best person, while Karina's brother served as her man of honor. As they exchanged vows with their feet in the sand and the sound of waves providing a backdrop to their promises, both reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. After a honeymoon exploring the islands of French Polynesia, they settled into a new life together in Boston. Yates divided his time between the east and west coasts, but as promised, spent the majority of his days in the city they now called home. They purchased a brownstone in Back Bay, combining Karina's love of cozy book-filled spaces with Yates's preference for modern elegance. Karina's new novel, inspired by their meeting, was published to critical acclaim, becoming her most successful work to date. Yates's company received FDA approval for their cardiac device, which began saving lives in hospitals across the country. A year after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Maya, meaning water in honor of how they met. As Karina cradled their newborn while Yates looked on, his eyes filled with wonder and love, she thought about the strange twists of fate that shaped lives. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked softly, stroking Maya's tiny cheek. "If I hadn't gone swimming that day, if you hadn't been on the beach at that exact moment." Yates sat beside her on the hospital bed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think some things are meant to be," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That rip current was just the universe's rather dramatic way of bringing us together." Karina laughed, leaning against him. "Next time, the universe could try something less life-threatening." "No next times," Yates murmured, gazing down at their daughter. "I found everything I need." As their family grew a son, joining them 2 years later, Yates and Karina built a life that balanced their career aspirations with their commitment to each other and their children. They returned to Fiji every year on the anniversary of their meeting, walking the beach where their story began, sometimes with their children splashing at the shoreline, always with the knowledge that the most powerful current they had ever faced was the one that had pulled them toward each other. 5 years after their first meeting, they stood on that beach once more, watching their children build sandcastles as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Any regrets?" Yates asked, his arm around Karina's waist. She looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, at the eyes that still regarded her with the same wonder they had on the day he'd pulled her from the ocean. "Not a single one," she replied, reaching up to touch the wave pendant she still wore every day. "You?" Yates smiled, pulling her closer. "Only that I didn't have a waterproof phone when I ran into the ocean that day. The photos would have been amazing for our wedding video." Karina laughed, the sound carried away by the tropical breeze. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand, she thought about the book she was currently writing, a story about second chances and unexpected love, about how lives could change in an instant when two people were brave enough to let the current carry them. In Yates' arms, watching their children play on the beach where their story had begun, Karina knew that some loves were worth the risk, worth diving into unknown waters, worth fighting against the pull of separate lives in distant cities. What they had built together was stronger than any current, more enduring than any tide. The rip current that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her everything she had never known. She wanted a partner who challenged and supported her, children who filled their days with joy and wonder, a love story more compelling than any she could have written. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Yates turned Karina in his arms, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that still held the same promise, the same passion as their first. Against her lips, he whispered, "Thank you for letting me save you." Karina smiled up at him, her heart full. "Thank you for being worth saving myself for." Together they walked toward their children, toward their future, the ocean that had once threatened to separate them forever. Now a beautiful backdrop to the life they had created, a life richer and more fulfilling than either had imagined possible on that fateful day, when a CEO pulled a struggling writer from a rip current, not expecting the woman he saved would steal his heart.